We get treated the exact same way from Ottawa.
Tonight, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith apologizes for putting Alberta and First Nations in the same boat.
We need to protect more of these pristine habitats. But at the same time, let's not forget about the disturbed, highly toxic places.
Plus, more words out of Montreal for protecting the earth. And 5 shootings over 3 days has North Battleford Mounties scrambling. Tansei Buzu Anin, everyone, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Indigenous people make up about 4% of the worldwide population, but they protect approximately 8% of the planet's biodiversity. And at the COP15 summit in Montreal, they're calling to protect the Earth's lungs, the Amazon rainforest. Here's Lindsay Richardson with more.
It's an important contradiction highlighted during the COP15 summit. While the world's most biodiverse areas are found in poorer countries in the south, most of the wealth needed to protect them comes from organizations in the north. On Wednesday, at least 7 South American countries walked out of stalling discussions, saying in a statement, when COP15 agrees on an ambitious global diversity framework, we will bear a higher burden than others in implementing it, something Indigenous land defenders of South America have maintained for years.
Este momento estamos en un crisis. La Amazonía del mundo es el corazón de todo continente. Por lo tanto, todos tenemos que cuidar y vivir dignamente de esta Amazonía que nos da vida a la humanidad.
Recent statistics show over 11,600 square kilometers of Amazon rainforest were destroyed in the last year. An estimated 45% of intact Amazon rainforest is found in Indigenous territories, which is why Indigenous groups feel they're key players in conservation.
Hay que olvidar la historia que pasó. Ahora hay que deponer los intereses personales. Ahora tenemos que crear un nuevo camino entre todos. Indígenas, no indígenas, jóvenes, hombres, mujeres, sabios y sabias, empresarios, tenemos que juntos crear un nuevo camino.
The Amazon rainforest spans 9 countries. Some, like Ecuador, have managed to stave off resource extraction. Others, like Brazil, have been less lucky.
Nós tivemos, durante o governo Bolsonaro, muitas empresas do norte global influenciando diretamente nos nossos territórios indígenas a invasão para mineração ou para produção de commodities. Só que tudo isso resultou em muita violência e morte dos nossos povos, mulheres, crianças, os nossos anciãos.
The outgoing Brazilian president Jair Bolsonaro is a climate change denier. Destruction in the Amazon spiked 88% during his first year in power. Josiela Danisa Jagso is an anthropologist and self-proclaimed Indigenous warrior from the Kangang Nation. She says Bolsonaro criminalized Indigenous resistance to development and is setting the agenda for Brazil's new president-elect.
Precisa compreender que a demarcação dos nossos territórios interfere diretamente na proteção da biodiversidade e no combate às mudanças climáticas. Demarcar terras indígenas é garantir a vida para os nossos povos, mas também para a biodiversidade.
Protection of the Amazon rainforest is a long-standing grassroots cause, especially after the wildfires of 2019. But this week's renewed call for resource protection is also getting a boost from celebrity circles.
Amazonía por la vida.
Amazonia for life.
Lo debemos hacer ya.
We really can make a difference today, now, together.
But as much as Indigenous guidance should be heeded, these warriors know nothing changes without political will.
Las acciones faltan. Entonces es momento de que los gobiernos cumplan con las promesas que se hace en cada eventos internacionales.
The groups are calling for an urgent global pact to protect 80% of the Amazon rainforest by 2025, an agreement uniting powers for the greater global good. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
This weekend, COP15 is set to finish up negotiations for a post-2020 biodiversity framework. Now, as a host country, Canada has presented itself as a leader in committing hundreds of millions in funds to protect biodiversity at home and abroad. But First Nations in northern Alberta feel like Canada isn't listening when it comes to tar sands cleanup. Amelia Fournier has more.
All of this, as Canada has been demonstrating through this COP, must be done in full partnership with Indigenous peoples. Success relies on full engagement, and it demands that we act with the urgency that is required.
Canada's been touting its collaboration throughout the COP15 conference, but Thursday, First Nations in northern Alberta sounded the alarm about Canada potentially allowing oil companies to dump toxic waste in vital waterways without Indigenous consent.
How does this fit with Canada's messages these past few weeks? Their vision for nature-based solutions, their vision for Indigenous-led conservation in protected areas, especially within a fragile ecosystem such as the downstream Peace Athabasca Delta.
Tailings ponds sound almost innocuous, but they're actually lake-sized deposits of toxic waste.
This is over 300 square kilometer of boreal forest.
It's wastewater from extracting oil from the Alberta tar sands that oil companies have been storing for decades. Now they've reached a point where they can't store much more. Canada has been looking at modifying the Fisheries Act to allow an exemption for oil companies to dump their partially treated waste into the Athabasca River that feeds into the Mackenzie River system, dubbed the Arctic Amazon. According to Melody Lepin of the Misiku First Nation, tailings ponds have led to high rates of autoimmune disease and cancer in downstream communities. Lepin says allowing this waste, even if it's partially treated, to filter into waterways could worsen health impacts.
So never has there been a baseline health study to examine what is changing the health of my community.
Affected First Nations are being consulted, but Lepin says they're worried other options to clean up tailings ponds, like reusing the water in tar sands extraction or treating the water until it's drinkable, are not being explored.
We have intervened, voicing concerns about the growth and management of these tailings, and here we are somewhat 40-something years later with only one option forced upon us, and that is to now treat and release these massive tailings ponds.
It is possible to purify tailings ponds water to the point where it's drinkable, but it's expensive. However, since the top 7 oil and gas companies made over $170 billion in profits in the first 9 months of 2022, Campaign for Nature suggests they should be footing more of the bill when it comes to biodiversity loss.
If we want to find a source for increased finance for biodiversity, it's simple. Let's place a windfall tax on those companies that have driven biodiversity loss, primarily the oil and gas companies and the mining companies. They have made massive profits in the last year, while the rest of the global economy has suffered.
Lepin says Alberta has not allocated enough funding for tailings ponds cleanup and says the federal government could also source some revenue.
The commitments to Indigenous and protected and conserved areas and the financial commitments for that, I applaud the government there. We need to conserve more. We need to protect more of these pristine habitats. But at the same time, let's not forget about the disturbed, highly toxic places.
Amelia Fournier, APTN National News, Montreal.
After developing countries walked out of COP15 negotiations Wednesday, countries of the global north said they'll put more money towards international biodiversity efforts by 2025. Leading into the final days of COP15 negotiations, developing nations are still pushing for new, consistent, unconditional funding towards protecting global biodiversity. Canada said it would provide another $350 million to support developing countries. Donor countries like the UK, Australia, Japan, the Netherlands, and the US also say they'll increase their funding for international biodiversity. The COP15 negotiators are supposed to release a finalized global biodiversity framework on Monday.
I'm confident, I think we're all confident that we can get this over the line. None of us are complacent. We know that we can't unlock ambition without finance, but we're not going to have enough finance without ambition either. I think that the move made by a bunch of donor countries yesterday to put new finance, significant additional finance on the table, has moved things along.
Nunavut's Inuit organizations held elections this week, and Baffin Island Inuit now have a familiar face as president. Olajuk Akasuk was elected as president for QIA, who represent Baffin Island Inuit. He defeated challenger Paul Okalik, a former Nunavut premier, by garnering 61% of the vote. That may sound like a lot of votes, but you have to take into account voter turnout. Only 20% of eligible voters cast a ballot. All right, we want to hear what you think about some of the stories you've seen so far tonight. Here's how to continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca, or you can leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Manitoba Premier Heather Stefanson emerged from a meeting with the Assembly Manitoba Chiefs today to pledge provincial funds for a feasibility study on conducting a search of a Winnipeg area landfill for the remains of 2 Indigenous women. Stephenson was joined by AMC Grand Chief Kathy Merrick.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Merrick said everyone has to step up because missing and murdered people is not just an Indigenous problem. Stephenson asked Manitobans to remember the victims this holiday season.
These crimes are a provincial and national tragedy, and another dark chapter has happened here in Winnipeg. We must take every effort to make it stop. We must stop this from happening.
It is not only an Indigenous problem. It's not only for Indigenous people. It's for Manitobans, and so also for all Canadians, that they be able to hear and that they be able to see what happens in the province of Manitoba.
The RCMP in North Battleford, Saskatchewan are investigating 5 shooting incidents that happened between December the 10th and the 13th. Last Saturday morning, shots were fired at 2 homes in North Battleford. No one was hurt in that incident. The next morning, a man was shot in the leg at his home. He was not seriously harmed. Monday night, another man was shot while walking down a street. According to RCMP, his injuries were serious but not life-threatening. Monday night, a bleeding woman walked into a hospital while police were investigating one of the other shootings. She said her car window was shot out while she was driving. She was treated for minor cuts and released. There have been no arrests in these shootings. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith apologized yesterday after her comments she made in the legislature on Tuesday. The Premier drew criticism for comparing Alberta's disagreements with Ottawa to Indigenous people's history with the Indian Act. The Indian Act that created reserves, residential schools, the pass system, and more.
The way I've described it to the chiefs that I've spoken with is that they have fought a battle over the last number of years to get sovereignty respected and to extract themselves from the paternalistic Indian Act. We get treated the exact same way from Ottawa. If my comments were misconstrued, I absolutely apologize for it, because my intention was to demonstrate that we have a common problem with Ottawa. Ottawa, I think, unfortunately, treats First Nations with disrespect, and they also treat provinces with disrespect.
Alberta's provincial government is setting up a new task force to address addiction, homelessness, and crime in the city of Calgary.
The work this funding covers includes further increasing treatment capacity with a new recovery community in Calgary, transforming correctional living units into treatment centres, creating hybrid health and police hubs in Calgary's downtown, expanding medical detox services, deploying harm reduction and recovery outreach teams, expanding access to emergency shelter space, piloting a service hub model to increase access to recovery, and improving access to affordable housing options that support recovery.
It's a historic day for Canada's Border Service Agency. They have made the largest seizure of opium ever recorded in their agency's history.
The seizure was made on October 25th at the Port of Vancouver. Border Services officers seized nearly 2,500 kilograms of opium, which they found in 247 shipping pallets. This is a really big deal. To give you an idea of just how large this is The shipment is more than half of all opium seizures in Canada's Pacific region over the last 5 years.
The drugs you see on screen came from just one of the 247 pallets, giving you an idea how massive this was. The drugs have an estimated street value of over $50 million. The CBSA cannot say where the opium came from, where the final destination was, or what groups may be connected due to an ongoing investigation. All right, we have to step aside for a short break. We'll have more news when we come back. Welcome back to APTN National News. You may be surprised to know APTN is not the only Indigenous broadcaster out there. Several nations around the world have their own, and collectively they're known as the World Indigenous Television Broadcasting Network, or WITBIN. They just finished meeting in Australia, and APTN CEO Monica Ile is there, and she spoke with our Dennis Ward.
Monica, thanks for being with us. I know it's bright and early over there. Can you remind our viewers of what the purpose is of WITBIN?
Yeah, so WITBIN is the World Indigenous Television Broadcasters Network, and this has been created in 2008. And the idea behind WITBIN is to reunite Indigenous broadcasters, and so we could work and collaborate together.
And so you've decided to get together in Australia. What's been the outcome?
Fantastic. It's been a meeting long overdue. Whitbin has been dormant for a few years, mainly because of COVID. As you know, international broadcasters, we don't meet that often. And for the past year, we've been meeting regularly on Zoom. But we came to a point that there's so much we could do virtually. We need to create the bonds, being together as a group to further the discussions. So we're looking at ways, how should we do this? Where shall we go? And NITV, which is the Indigenous broadcaster here in Australia, celebrated their 10th year free to air to all Australian. So we took that opportunity to come and meet as a group to reunite Whitbin, but also to celebrate NITV's accomplishments.
Well, not only was the meeting in Australia, but at a sacred place known as Uluru. Can you tell us more about that?
Okay, that is way more than just a rock. As you fly in, there's the desert. You see nothing, and suddenly you see this formation, and it is so big and impressive. And as you get to the site, you feel the strength of it. And we had the opportunity to do a walk around it with an Anga person. That's their territory. And Tina explained her stories and the sacred sites, the ceremonial sites for men, for women, where the elders used to gather and cook the food. You saw some petroglyphs on the walls. It was such a powerful place to be, and we feel very privileged to have been invited by the people to be there.
Sounds absolutely incredible. What could the revitalization of Whitbin mean for viewers of APTN?
Well, that's an excellent question. So we're working hard. So we had people from our news team and programming team here. They had lots of discussions. So in the short term, in the new year already, you will see on our news, international news stories. We've noticed that we share common bonds, common ideas, common struggles and concerns. So we're really going to work on those and put those stories into context to present. And the idea behind all of this is to make sure that our stories have a wider reach, so people have a better understanding of who we are, where we come from, and what our aspirations are. So on the news side and on the programming side, they're thinking of doing some collaborative program. And they've thought about doing something maybe on climate change. We've noticed that's common to all of us. And if every broadcaster could do one episode, then you could have a full series to present. So that's going to be, it's longer term, but that's in the works as well.
Well, it all sounds amazing, Monica. Not jealous at all of you all over there on day 2 of our 3-day storm here, but appreciate appreciate you taking the time for us to lay it out for our viewers.
Well, thank you so much. And in the language that I learned here, to say thank you and goodbye is palaya.
All right, it's time to step aside one final time. Still ahead, our photo of the day and weather. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. How's this for an early evening view from the balcony? Thanks to Jean Weeks that shared this photo. Jean spends time drawing from this place. Jean, you'll have to send us a photo of some of your work. If you have a photo you would like to share, you can send it by email to share@aptn.ca. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 5 in Halifax and 3 in Charlottetown. +1 in Cartwright and -5 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 0 degrees in Quebec City and 1 in Montreal. -1 in Toronto and snow and 0 in North Bay. 0 and snow in Timmins and -16 in Big Trout Lake. -24 and some snow in Churchill and -22 in Thompson. Snow and -14 in Barons River and -13 in Winnipeg. Snowing and -17 in Regina and -15 in snow in Saskatoon. -17 in Buffalo Narrows and -26 in Stony Rapids. Moving west to -23 in Fort Chipewyan and -24 in Fort McMurray. -2 and some snow in Edmonton and snow in -1 in Calgary. 3 degrees in Vancouver and -11 in Bella Coola. -6 in Sandspit and -25 in Fort Nelson. -41 in Clear and Mayo and -33 in Rock River. -21 in Norman Wells and -26 in Yellowknife. -23 in Fort McPherson and -25 in Colville Lake. Snow and -24 in Cambridge Bay and -30 in Whale Cove. -24 in Aglulik and -3 in Iqaluit. A new research mission on the environment has been launched.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff.
A SpaceX rocket blasted off this morning from Florida, carrying an American-French satellite. It's designed to carry out an unprecedented global survey of the Earth's surface waters. The mission is expected to shed new light on the mechanics and consequences of climate change.
From the ground camera, and also we switch.
All right, that's all we have for you this time around on APTN National News. We leave you tonight with some holiday carols from Alberta sung by Jordan Charlesworth. I'm Daryl Stranger. For all of us here, thank you for joining us. Chimigwich, stay safe and have a good weekend.
Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell rock. Jingle bells chime in jingle bell time. Snowing and blowing up bushels of fun. Now the jingle hop has begun. Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell rock. Jingle bells chime in jingle bell time. Dancing and prancing in Jingle Bell Square. In the frosty air, what a bright